Okay, I think we can get started. More people may join us. And if they miss too much, they can watch the recording, which will be sent out to everybody next week. First, welcome to the first in a series of webinars about the death penalty being produced by Death Penalty Focus. We're launching our series with this conversation about women on death row during International Death Penalty Abolition Week. I'm Maddy deLone, and I'm the Interim Executive Director of Death Penalty Focus. Death Penalty Focus is a California-based nonprofit that has been committed to abolishing the death penalty in California, in other parts of the country, and in the world for more than 30 years. It works in coalitions with others in California to raise awareness about how unfair, racist, and barbaric the death penalty is. As it works toward the ultimate abolition of the death penalty in California, it also works with others to reduce the numbers of people on death row and those sentenced to death. For more information about Death Penalty Focus and to find out how you can be involved, please go to our website found on the screen behind me. I'm deeply honored to be here with all of you who have turned in today, and really want to thank you for taking your time to spend with us. Special thanks to our, you see, I think I've shared it. Special thanks to our co-sponsors of today's event, sponsoring organizations. Are we seeing it? Yes. We're seeing the co-sponsors on the screen? Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Who have helped spread the word about this webinar and all do amazing work in this field and in related ones. We thank them. You can see who they are, and I'll leave that up for a minute so you can look at it more carefully. It will also be on the materials that are sent to you after this webinar. Before we begin, there are just a few technical issues to go over by this point. Many of you know how to use Zoom. But for the purpose of today's session, we'd ask you to use the chat function, usually found either at the bottom or along the side of your screen. You can send us concerns about technical issues in the chat, but you can also send us questions that you have for the panelists. We will try to get to as many of your questions as we can. We'll be together for about an hour today, and we'll try to wrap it up a few minutes before the next hour to get you to your next activity on time. I'm now honored to introduce my friend and colleague, Diann Rust-Tierney, who will moderate today's conversation, Women on Death Row. She will in turn introduce the topic and the other panelists. Diann Rust-Tierney is a national legal and legislative policy advocate with more than 35 years of experience developing, coordinating, and implementing policy and culture change in order to advance civil and human rights. She is currently the Robert F. Drinan Visiting Professor for Human Rights at Georgetown University for the academic year 2021-2022. She also serves as the Senior Director of Advocacy for Caring Across Generations, a campaign that is working to bring our caregiving infrastructure into the 21st century. She was on the board and has served as the Executive Director of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, where she led efforts for many years to develop a coordinated state and federal strategy to reduce support for and ultimately an end to capital punishment in the United States. I could go on, and you can learn more in her bio, but without further ado, Diann, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Maddy. I am honored to be here today to participate in this panel with these two amazing people. And I want to extend my thanks to Death Penalty Focus for bringing us all together, and to Maddy in particular for all the work she's done to connect us. And it really has been a real pleasure to reconnect with folks and to talk about these issues. You know, everything is on the line today. Our democracy is on the line. If we didn't understand it before, we should now understand not only the role that the death penalty plays in enforcing structural inequality and the racial caste system, but it is an essential role, plays an essential role in reinforcing the role that is played when it comes to dictators and people who are trying to be authoritarians. It's not an accident that we saw the first woman executed since 1953 during the controlled chaos at the end of the Trump administration. It is essential that we have that kind of chaos and violence to perpetuate a system that makes us look at other people as less than human. When we come to talk about the death penalty and women in particular, we have to understand that we're working in a context in which the Equal Rights Amendment hasn't even been ratified by the United States. We're looking at a context in which women, even though we're seeing people come back from the job market after a pandemic, women are still losing the job share. We're looking at a situation where women are still paid much less than men for the same job, and where the work that women do is undervalued. And so in that context, we have to ask ourselves, can we have a system that judges people and decides who should live and who should die when we haven't addressed the fundamental issues of gender bias, in the same way that we can't have a system that addresses, decides who lives and who dies when it comes to the death penalty, when we haven't addressed our longstanding history of the racial caste system and racial inequality. And so it's in that context that we want to talk about women. Women don't feature much in the conversation about the death penalty, and that's understandable because most women are not sent to death row who commit homicides. Women on death row make up only a very small percentage of all of those who are sentenced to death, and an even smaller percentage of those who are executed. And then when we talk about the number of women who are sent to death row who are innocent, we see that we have even less of a window. And so today we have a real opportunity to understand what it's like to be a woman on death row, and more importantly, what it's like to be an innocent woman on death row. And with that, I want to introduce our panelists. Sabrina Butler was the first woman exonerated from death row in the US. She was wrongfully convicted in Mississippi in March 1990 of the death of her 9-month-old son, Walter, the year before, and sentenced to death. She spent 2 years as the only woman on death row before being granted a second trial. During that trial, for the first time, a jury heard testimony from neighbors who said Sabrina had attempted to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation on the baby, as did one other neighbor. And those attempts that made the medic expert think that that was what had caused the injuries that led to the death of the child and her being charged with murder. Sabrina was exonerated of all wrongdoing and released in December 1995. She subsequently won compensation from the state for wrongful conviction. She served 6.5 years for a crime she didn't commit. Sonny Jacobs was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in Florida for a murder she didn't commit in 1976. She was 27 years old. She was separated from her 2 children, her 9-year-old son and 10-month-old daughter, and sent to solitary confinement on death row. She and her husband, Jesse Tafaro, also sentenced to death, had been convicted of the murder of 2 police officers based on the testimony of the actual killer, who made a plea bargain for 3 life sentences in exchange for his testimony against them. Sonny spent 5 years in solitary confinement before her sentence was commuted to life. She then spent 12 years in prison, during which time she lost her parents, her children were sent into foster care, and her husband, Jesse, was executed. Sonny was in prison for 17 years before she was released in 1992. So I'd like to start the conversation asking our panelists to reflect on what it means to have been a woman on death row, what it means to have been part of a population that is essentially voiceless, even in the conversation about whether we should have the death penalty. So why don't we start with Sonny?
Okay. Well, first of all, when a person is sentenced to death, it doesn't just, the sentence doesn't just apply to them. It applies to their whole family. their whole family is affected by the sentence. And not only are you vilified, but they're vilified too. So it really is a much larger question than we would originally think, that it's just you get sentenced to death. Even when you're just on trial, women especially aren't supposed to get in trouble. Men, boys will be boys, but women are supposed to be, home baking bread or something. And so we are totally, again, vilified even from the beginning. And that's another thing that really has to be examined, is how the press is allowed to basically try you, trial by media, before you even get to trial. So your jurors, who aren't really supposed to pay attention to any of that, being human, can't help but pay attention to that. I think that especially where the children are concerned, when a parent is sentenced to death, and most women who are sentenced to death are mothers, I think the effects are just horrendous and lifelong, and even further, even into the next generation. So for all those reasons, I think that the death penalty needs to be totally abolished, at least. And I was told years ago, when I first got out and I was campaigning against the death penalty, and I ended up in Sweden. There was a man named Hans Jorn Frank who had helped established Amnesty International in Sweden. And he said, I asked him, what could I do? And he said, when the US stops using the death penalty, then the rest will follow. And I even though our reputation is a bit tarnished these days, I still think that's true. So.
Sabrina, what's your perspective being a woman on death row, and what is that like? What is that like? What does it tell us?
Well, as far as being innocent on death row is
Right.
very wrong. I mean, to me, it messes with you. If you don't have a strong constitution, and the things that occur that you see while being incarcerated, period, can be life-changing. You know what I'm saying? It's traumatizing to us as it is. We have a form of PTSD, and I can't say that I don't have that, because I do. I will never forget the horror of going through such a traumatic experience. Being on death row and innocent is worse, 10 times worse than being on death row and you did the crime. You understand what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So I think that Sonny is right. It not only traumatizes you, but it does your family as well. Because my mom went homeless trying to fight for me. So it was horrible. And I was only a child. And I wanted to say that in some of the comments, as far as my son, he had medical issues as well. So those were, his death was not, for my CPR. He already had passed before I started CPR. He had heart, kidney, and bowel problems. And that is what causes death in the first place. And I wanted to say that I have a daughter that's going through the same thing. She has the same exact disease. So it is very hard for me to know that the state almost killed me for a wrong that was never a wrong. It was never a wrong to start with. And how could you deal with something like that being on death row? So yes, death row is very hard. And even for victims' family members, I have been on many panels with people that are victims' family members. They don't want the death penalty. They just want a closure, because they're constantly being talked to by the state. Oh, we're going to kill them today. Oh, we're going to kill them tomorrow. Oh, we're going to do this. And they're steady being traumatized over and over again. So I don't understand the point. I really don't understand that. So no, I don't think that is a good thing. I think the death penalty needs to be abolished, and they need to find a better way of doing things.
Right. Was it your experience in terms of that women were treated differently in terms of, the conditions on death row, in terms of how society looks at women? I think we touched on the idea that there, there's certain roles that women are supposed to play. And when a woman is charged with or convicted of a particular type of crime, a domestic crime, does the system come down harsher on her than on others? I think that women, it seems, when they're convicted of a crime involving a family member, are treated much harsher and more and differently than a man, and how much of that is a factor in both women being sentenced, the likelihood of an innocent woman being sentenced, and then the conditions that you're living under.
Yes, I think I mean, all of it is bad, but I think our conditions are totally different because first of all, we're women. They don't look at the fact that we have children, we have personal hygiene and those type of things. When you're in prison, they don't care about all of that. You may need sanitary this or, personal this. They don't care nothing about that. They create you to be this monster. And that's what they painted me as, a mother that didn't care about her child and, beat them to death. And I did all these type of things. And with those type of charges going in prison, you're not safe. I had to fight every day of my life to survive because I was accused of killing my child. And that's what makes it bad. Guys go in, some guys go in for drug charges or whatever, sure, yes, I'm not trying to downplay anything. I'm just saying that ours is a little bit different, the way we are treated, because they don't look for the things that men have. You know what I'm saying? We have to have different stuff. So yes, I think it's different. Yes, I really do.
Sonny, how was your experience different being an innocent woman on death row?
Well, when I was tried and convicted, it was in 1976, and there had been a 3-year moratorium on using the death penalty at that particular time. So as it turned out, there were a few men, but there were no women in the whole United States. So I became the first woman after that time to have a death sentence. So I was kept in isolation, in solitary confinement. And I was in solitary confinement for the entire 5 years that I had the death sentence before my sentence was changed to life. And as a result, my experience was very different than anyone else's at the time. The men, they are in the cells like you see on TV with the bars, and they can, hold out the mirror and see each other and whatever. Of course, there are the downside to that too, because it's noisy and, you can't, you can't have any peace. But for me, I was completely isolated from the rest of the population. I wasn't allowed any communication with any other prisoners, and the guards were under instructions not to speak to me as well. I didn't get phone calls. I didn't even get letters in the beginning. So I was totally isolated. And that is an experience that I think I think is unique at this point in time, and beyond any language that I have. It's beyond traumatizing, because you're completely alone. Completely. I was the only person in the building. And they told me that if I misbehaved in any way, that there was this thing called a creech tank in the next area beyond where the cells were, and that it was like a bathysphere with a ladder up the top, and then they would put you in and close the hatch, and they would hose you down to wash you, and they would lower your food in, and that was where I would be if I misbehaved in my death cell. So it was a horrendous experience. I think because I was alone, they could do that to me. There's safety in numbers, even if you're sentenced to death. I think one of the things I didn't have to put up with was seeing people that I had spent years with and gotten to know being taken away and executed and smelling their flesh burn. I didn't have to do that. But as an innocent person, it just makes your experience completely different in some ways. But I have to say, the other prisoners don't care. I mean, when my sentence was changed from death to life and I went into the population, the thing that gave me any standing at all was the fact that I had done 5 years in solitary confinement, sentenced to death. But being innocent, they'll laugh at you, because even prisoners believe in the system. After all, I got it right for most of them. So, yeah.
So what we're hearing about, which is, I think this is, such a gift that you all are giving us, because, most people have a very superficial understanding, even of the death penalty, let alone the criminal justice system. And so we have a system that in theory is a punishment, but what we're hearing is punishment on top of punishment. There's the sentence of death, but then there's the conditions under which you're kept. I don't think that many people have heard the kind of story that you've talked about in terms of, what is taken for granted is how we treat human beings. And I feel like that is another important element, because if we accept that we have the death penalty, we accept that people are going to be put down a hole somewhere, and hosed down and given their food through a lower down to them. And so I think that that's exposing something about why we need to end the death penalty that even goes beyond this practice. We cannot accept a system that treats human beings this way. I want to give you each another opportunity to kind of share a reflection from your time, and then I want to talk to you about what you've been doing since you came back. So I'll start with Sabrina. You want to share one other reflection, something that you feel that people need to know right now from your experience, and then I'll give Sunny the same opportunity.
Well, what I really feel that people need to know is the death sentences, the death penalty, they're using it as a weapon. That's exactly what it is. They're using it as a weapon. It's racially motivated. And they, I have never seen anything like that in my life. If you are pro-life and then death at the same time, there's no way that you could do both. You don't want to see an abortion happen, but you want to kill somebody. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand it. What I feel like is that this system needs to overhaul, and we need to, it's so messed up, I don't think they can fix it. So why don't you stop where you are? Stop the things that you're doing, put that on hold, and start something else, because it's so broken right now. I don't think they can fix it. That is the reason why us as exonerees are being treated the way we're being treated. You know what I'm saying? And they don't give us the recognition that we deserve, really. I really don't feel like we are. A lot of us need mental health. Mental health is a huge thing, especially when you have somebody convicted of a crime that he didn't commit, even those that committed it. Mental health needs to be taken care of. It really does. And I think that we need that. And they're not caring about that. All they're caring about is killing people. And I think that's wrong. What I have been doing now since I've been out is I'm trying to open an organization here in Memphis, Tennessee, to help exonerated women and those that have been done their time and got out. I'm trying to open a halfway house here to help them as much as I can. I'm working on my book. I put the first one out, but you know what I'm saying? I'm doing a second one. And I still travel and work with Witness to Innocence. And I've been a champion for it, and I'm going to continue to do it. And that's what I've been doing ever since I've been out. And I've been doing this a long time. So that's what I do.
Sunny, you want to share what is the one thing you want people to take away from your experience, and then tell us what you've been doing since you've come home?
Well, I would start with the fact that when I was sentenced to death, at first I had no communication with anybody, but then Jesse, when he could write letters, he told me, like, the men were allowed canteen, coffee and creamer and ice cream, and things like that. I wasn't allowed anything like that. They could have library books. I didn't have anything like that. They got out for 4 hours a week of exercise together. I didn't have anything like that. Why? It had to be because I was a woman. No other reason. Because, like Sabrina said, we're a minority. And so we had no voice. The men could get together and raise a fuss and stick together as a group. There's power in numbers, but as a woman with a sentence of death, you have no power at all. So I think that's an important thing to understand. And also, I think, again, the effect on the children is so horrendous, and there's absolutely no help for the families, the children of people sentenced to death. And that is so wrong. I just spoke to someone in Italy who said, oh, we could never have the death penalty because it's in our constitution that even if a person is there's always has to be room for a person to become better. I'm sure that it's worded differently, but it's Italian, so you know. and I thought that's so wonderful. That should be in our constitution. That there should always the purpose should be to help a person to become better, not to just say, okay, we're going to get rid of you. The message that sends to young people is that if you do something that makes me angry enough, I will kill you, and that's legal. What kind of message is that? Where are we going with that? So I think it's really important if we want to continue to be a leader in the field of human rights in this world, that we step up and show that there is a better way. And that's what I'd like people to take away. And there's something that everybody can do. Every single person can do something. Whether you're in elementary school or you're in an old folks home, you can do something. You can write a letter to a person on death row. You can make sure you vote for people who are going to get rid of the death penalty, for people who are trying to institute conviction integrity units. They get a heck of a time, even from their own people. I mean, there's a movement happening now. And if we get behind it, we can take 3 steps forward, and then we'll take 2 steps backwards. But at least we'll have 1 step forward that will stay until the next decade when we get another chance. So I think we really need to get together and push and at least get rid of the death penalty. And until then, we need to institute services that help people who are affected by it.
Sonny, what have you been doing since you came home? Tell people a little about. I've seen a couple of articles about you, but everybody may not know.
When I first got out, I just had to make a life, because all I had was a little cardboard box with everything I owned in the world. I went in, I was 27. I came out, I was 45. When I went in, I had parents and a husband and children, young children. And when I came out, I was a widow and an orphan and a grandmother. And my 9-year-old son had a daughter of his own, and I was 45 years old, and nobody would hire me, right? I mean, who's hiring a 45-year-old with my work record? And so fortunately, I knew how to do yoga, and I had been teaching yoga in the prison. So I started teaching yoga, and I employed myself. And then I became active in the anti-death penalty movement, a death penalty focus, as a matter of fact, because I was in LA. And then I had to stop. I had to step back, because that wasn't helping me make a life. It was difficult for me, because it was keeping me as a victim of the system, and I couldn't move forward. So I had to step back and focus on how to move myself forward and be something other than that. And once I was able to accomplish that, then I went back to it, and I've never stopped. And like Sabrina, and I think I'm the only person who's been married to 2 men who were sentenced to death, because my husband now, Peter Pringle, was also sentenced to death in Ireland, wrongly convicted. And now the 2 of us administer the Sunny Center Foundation to help other people who were wrongly convicted when they're released. And we just feel. There was a question that said, where do you find the strength? Well, I think it's more that it's grace than strength. It's really grace that's given us this ability to do this. And so credit where credit's due. I think that's true.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Sabrina to answer that question that you already previewed and answered about what keeps you going. But I also just want to underline, the tragedy here. We have 2 people who were not only innocent on death row, but had the system had its way, these 2 women, with so much that they've been offering the world, doesn't exist anymore. And that is the tragedy and the wrongheadedness of the death penalty, that we don't know what people are able to do, what their potential is. And so we've got two amazing examples of that. Sabrina, what keeps you going?
Well, for one, I have to stay strong for my daughter because it's an everyday battle for her. She has kidney disease, the same disease that my son died from. And I can't be at a point in my life where she sees me down because, I try to keep her going. You know what I'm saying? Because it's an uphill battle for her because she's not accepting that she just turned 18. So, that in itself keeps me going because I know that I got something to do. And that's to fight for my child and to explain to everybody that just because they knock me down, it don't mean that I'm not going to get back up. So I'm up and I'm trying to get in any and everything I can get in, to try to make a difference, and that's what I'm doing right now.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Let me ask, you touched on this a little bit, Sunny, but I just want to give you an opportunity to sort of say explicitly to people, what you want them to do. This was a nice webinar. We got to hear your stories, but we don't want people just to say, I've heard that was interesting, and keep on keeping on. What do you want people to do? What's your mission for folks after hearing what you have to say? And then I'll ask Sabrina the same question.
Well, I think I pretty well said that. First of all, there's a number of people that have asked if you want to get in touch, if you want to be connected. My organization is sunnycenter.org, SUNNY, sunnycenter.org, and it's the Sunny Center Foundation. Oh gosh, there's so many things you can do aside from the things I named. Mainly, I think talk to people. Start a conversation. If there's maybe volunteer, like what we do, we now have a living center in Tampa, Florida for exonerees, wrongly convicted people, and they're mostly ones that were sentenced to death, actually, and spent 30 and more years on death row, which is insane. We next to them are short timers, me with my 17 and Sabrina with her 6. It's terrible. And we need, people to say that when a person is sentenced to death, if they were wrongly sentenced to death and they get out, they need to be brought into the community. They need to be reconnected with the community again. Take them to your church or your synagogue or your mosque. Take them and introduce them and bring them in as part of the family. When someone is on trial and then gets convicted and sentenced to death, the family of that person is devastated. They need support. Mostly. I always use Eileen Wuornos as an example. That poor woman, they made her out. Look, the movie, The Monster. That was disgusting. That woman was a meek, mild person. She was in before when they let her out. I don't know what some truck driver did to her, but it sent her over the edge. And then she was back. And then it was a tragedy what happened to her because she was mentally ill, for God's sake. It's obvious. Anybody who would do any of the things that people are on death row for that were actually guilty of, they were suffering mental illness at the time. It's a tragedy. It's just a total tragedy. So befriend them. Befriend the families. My parents had to move. My son, when he was finally released from juvenile detention after 2 months at 9 years old, he had to go to special school, not only because he no longer could read, but because the children would make fun of him and say, your mother's a murderer and she's going to go to the electric chair. When Jesse was executed, there was no help for our family. My daughter tried to take her own life when she heard what happened to him. So what did her foster family do? They didn't know what to do. They sent her away to a school for children with emotional and behavioral problems, and she was locked up until she was 18 years old. she was locked up too. I mean, these people need support. So if you want to know more, get in touch with me at sunnycenter.org, and I'll be happy to continue this conversation.
Thank you. Sabrina, what do you want people to do after hearing this conversation?
Well, first of all, we got to do change. Mama always told me that a closed mouth will never get fed. So we need to see who we put in office. We need to study these people, research, go to our constituents, talk to the legislative session, whatever you got to do to try to make a change. Because if you don't do that, then how can we change anything? If you don't vote, you know, especially in my community, people are like, okay, well, it's going to happen to us anyway. We're going to give up. Wrong attitude. You should not have that attitude. If you want stuff to change, you're going to have to make a change. You got to get out there, pound them streets, walk, do whatever it took. Because the district attorney that destroyed my life, I kept on going until I got him out of office.
Okay.
So I know it can work, you know, and no, I'm not angry. I've learned to forgive those that have wronged me, but it still don't stop me from going to hope and try to fix what's happening now to people. Like the Purvis Payne case was heard today. We're waiting on, you know, I'm not sure now because I'm on here with you to wait and see if we heard anything about his mental state. So what I'm saying is we can do more than just sit and talk about this. We got to put some action. We got to move our feet. That's the only thing I can tell you.
Thank you. Maddy, I think we're ready to take some questions from the audience.
Yes, well, a number of them have been answered, and there are lots of great questions here. Some of you just in general have asked the question, you've offered things that people can do. And so I think we can add that to the materials we post and send out to you at the end of the seminar. So we're not going to go through all of those right now, but we will add to them. Sabrina, there was a question about somebody wonders if there's a GoFundMe, if there's a way to support you directly. I don't know if you want to share that information or if there is that information to share.
Okay, well, what I'm doing right now, my book is not completely finished. I'm at the end of it. And if you would just go on my exonerated page, exonerated the Sabrina Butler story on Facebook, and I will post when my book drops and then let you guys know where I'm going from there. And as far as my organization, I will also post and let you guys know if you guys just follow me on Facebook. It's exonerated the Sabrina Butler story. Just look that up and then I'll post. I post most of everything I do there.
Okay, and we can add that information also to the sheet in case you didn't have a chance to write it down. I think there's also a couple of other, the link to support the Sunny Center is on in the chat, and we will add that to the materials we send at the end. You answered the question a little bit. I think one audience member wants to know about solitary confinement, how you had the strength, what you did, how you survived that particular part of the time.
Man, solitary confinement was horrible. I mean, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. If you don't have a strong constitution, it is hard to deal with that because I had to figure out how to stay warm when it was cold. I had to figure out how to stay cool when it was hot. You know, I used to get ants on my tray, rats in my cell. It was horrible. I mean, it was nothing that I could just really explain. You would have to be there. I was in a 6x9 cell, no bigger than your bathroom. And I just, you know, I don't know how I survived. God was my only hope. Because it was hard. That was a very hard. That was hard.
Well, I'll tell you what I did. And it was really until this thing happened, I was just overwhelmed by my situation. I had 6 steps from the toilet to the solid metal door, back and forth, and that's what I did. I paced back and forth, angry, afraid, confused, in despair. I mean, you know, and there are no phone calls and there are no visits. I mean, it was just that way for in the beginning. And
come right. Well, I got my camera off right quick so they can't see.
Okay. And I didn't get out of my cell except for twice a week for a brief shower and about 15 minutes out in a courtyard with a guard who didn't speak to me. And then I'd be put back in my cell for another 3 or 4 days. And that's how it was. So but I had a Bible and I had a law book. The law book was incomprehensible to me at that point in time, but the Bible was a book of wisdom, and I would open it to any page, and it usually always said something that I needed to hear. But this one particular day, it said that they don't get to say when I die. And that gave me my life back, because maybe it was true that for some reason of karma that I didn't understand, they were going to take my life. But, or maybe it was going to be true, like I thought, that they figure out they made a mistake and send me home to my children. But at that point, I realized that I did have options, that I could believe in hope rather than hopelessness. And if there was God, then I wasn't really ever alone, and there was hope. Without God, then it was pretty hopeless. So I made a decision. I had a conversation with God, and then I went on to just try to make myself the best person I could be in the time that I had there, be it long or be it short. So I used yoga, meditation, and prayer. That became my trinity, and that's what got me through that. It got me through the transition into the population, which was a celebration at first, but there were days, I have to say, that I wished for the solitude of my death row cell without the death sentence. And then when I got out, the same thing. It's a huge transition for which you're not prepared. And I turned to yoga, meditation, and prayer, and I do that on a daily basis to this day, because then there's forgiveness, and that's a big deal. And it's not a thing you do and go, all right, got that. No, it's an ongoing process for the rest of your life. Because now, even when I see that what happened to me and what affected my children is now affecting my grandchildren's lives, I get mad again. I get angry to see that even now, and I have to forgive them again, but I do, because my well-being depends on it. So, like Sabrina said, it's a book. I have a book too. Peter has a book. I'm working on a third book about what it's like to get out. So it's too big. It's a big subject.
I appreciate that. And I'm just on your book, Sunny, there's a comment here, which I just thought you'd appreciate and others can learn from it. From Andrea Ball. Sunny, I'm totally blind and got your book Stolen Time on Bookshare. With my screen reader, I can contact governors and elected officials and write letters. Here in Ohio, we're pushing for abolition of the death penalty. So there's lots of things that people can do. And I think if you sign up for the Sunny Center, sign up for Death Penalty Focus, Witness to Innocence, Sabrina's organizations, any of the co-sponsors, you can find actions. Death Penalty Action is on the list. Innocence Project, I mean, the list goes on, but there are actions and things that you can do to support individual cases or policy reform. So many opportunities to help. Does anybody know, I'm not sure, the question is whether the conditions, women versus men, death row or otherwise, are still this different, or are they the same, sort of the same kind of differences that as when you were there? Has anything changed in that respect? I don't know, Diann, if you know that, or Sabrina, if you.
I'll give Sabrina and Sunny an opportunity. I can share my perspective after.
Well, as far as the Mississippi prison that I was in, the conditions are worse. It's raining in the building. It's the women are. I have another a person that was on death row with me at the time. She's no longer on death row, but she calls me all the time. We stay in touch, and she tells me about the conditions. So no, the conditions for the women haven't changed. They've actually taken the women out of the part that was better and put the men over there and gave the women the worst. So yeah, it's gotten worse.
Yeah. For me, I as I said, I was isolated for the entire 5 years. And on the one hand, the women who are sentenced to death now have each other to support each other. But then again, I didn't have to watch somebody get taken away and executed either. So there is no good way to be on death row. I mean, it's either bad or worse.
That's right. There's no good
way. Yeah.
No good way.
Yeah, really. Conditions these days, there's been a swing, towards everything being more mean and more angry. And so right now we need to push back. We need to push back and help things to be more humane. What lesson do we really want to teach people? Most people in prison are going to get out and be your neighbors. Hello. Mhm. You want to be angry and feel deprived and beaten down? Or do you want them to feel like maybe there's hope for me, that I can have a better life now after I made that mistake and paid my dues to society? What do you want? What's the lesson you want to teach?
Instead of creating monsters, I think they should educate. Education is the key. And they don't do that when they put them in prison, do they? Sonny, they don't do that. They don't educate nothing. They just come in, they have problems at home with all of their families, and they come in, they take it out on the inmates. They treat you like crap. And I mean, if you push back, then here comes the K9 unit to beat you into submission. So you can't win in prison. So I don't understand why they won't have programs to help people instead of creating monsters, because that's what they're doing. They're not helping you to solve anything.
Everybody who comes off of death row and is released has terrible dental problems and health problems, because you're sentenced to death, so they're not going to bother to fix your teeth.
No,
they're not going to bother to fix your medical problems. You're sentenced to death. So why would they bother to waste money on your teeth? It's really sad. It's really very sad.
And what makes it so bad, when I got out, the organization that I work with now is who helped me get my teeth fixed. That's sad. They helped me get my teeth fixed. And it was for free. Because I didn't have any money to pay for anything. It's a struggle for exonerees when we get out. There is no job. What are you going to tell the people? Oh, I was on death row, but I didn't do it. Can you still give me a job? No, they're not going to hire you. They don't care about that. So what happens to the people who are exonerated? What happens to us? They don't care. They don't care.
That's why we started the work that we do. Sabrina also, because we have to help each other, because there is nobody else.
Right. Absolutely.
Now, there are some people, and I do want to give credit, like Jason Flom. He's #1 angel for all exonerees. He's there for everybody. He's an amazing human being. I'd also, in my own personal case, like to shout out to Mickey Dickoff and Christy Webb, who gave me a home when I first got out, because my parents died. I didn't have a home. I would have been homeless. I mean, my son actually did say that I could live with him. And so that would have been okay. But he had lost all faith in society by then. He was living way out in the country. And I really wanted to find some opportunities and seize the world and do something. So I accepted their offer to come to LA. Otherwise, I think my life might have been very, very different. And that's again what we try to give to people now, is a chance to decompress and not have to take on the responsibilities of the world all in one go, and to just give them a chance to get used to just breathing free and taking your cup of coffee and sitting outside and listening to the birds in the morning and not being afraid. That's a big deal.
It is.
Big deal.
People take that for granted. People take that for granted, and I really don't. I love it. I enjoy that.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you all very much.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that testimony, Maddy.
Okay.
Questions?
I think there are a few more questions, and then I'll let you wrap up, Diann, or others. I think, really just much heartfelt thanks to Sonny and Sabrina and many people who remember them together and separately at different events, and know that they've had a tremendous impact on changing people's lives and the direction of our policies in this country and abroad. So one was just the wrongful conviction gathering in Illinois back in 1998, where you both were, and just the impact that has had. There's a question about which you may or may not want to answer. It's always up to you, but just about people you left behind and sort of what, people can do for others who remain inside.
Well, for one, I can say that when you're in there, you're alone. And if you would just reach out, write a letter, send a card, say something. I mean, I used to love to get cards from somebody just to know that I was wanted. That made me feel like something, those holidays or things like that. I didn't have anything, getting things sent to you if it's allowed. Reach out. I mean, it doesn't hurt. There's still people too. You know what I'm saying? There's still people too. So, it doesn't hurt.
Well, I'm tempted to ask you to say the question again because my mind went back.
It was just, are there people you were inside with, Sunny? We know, when you were off of the row, but who are still there, or are there people, what can people do who want to help folks who are inside?
Well, like Sabrina said, you don't go to make friends, and most people there have problems and, are desperate. But occasionally you do make a friend.
Yeah.
In my book, I call my friend Colleen. It's not her real name, but again, I'd like to honor her. We're still friends to this day. And you can tell a lot about how a person's life is going to be after prison by what they did in prison. You really can. If there's anything to take advantage of, any program, any work opportunity, you just try so hard to do anything to better yourself, to keep your mind alert, to feel like you're doing something. And so it's important to make sure that there are programs in prison. They took away Pell Grants for a while. I think they may have gotten them back recently. It's so important to have outlets for your emotions when you're in prison. I know there are a number of women that are still there that I knew, and really the only thing you can do is let them know that you care. Send them, there are packages. Sometimes people can get packages from home. You can arrange to send the package to a prisoner. That's a big deal, a really big deal, because even if they don't like what you sent, they can trade it for other stuff. It like Sabrina said, it's really important to know that there are people outside who care enough to take the time to write you a letter. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And I would just like to say that just for everybody who doesn't know, it's very hard to get back with your family. Sabrina is very, very blessed and lucky that she is, has a relationship with her brothers and sisters, and gosh, and me, I am totally blessed that I have a relationship now with my children, my son Eric and my daughter Christina. I mean, we are the very best of friends. And even with my grandchildren, but most people don't have that. You have to know, most people don't get back together with their family because the stigma was too overwhelming, and time has moved on without you.
All their family members are gone, because I got friends that have been in prison, and family members, every last one of them have passed away, so they have nobody.
Yep. We're supporting a man now whose name is Andre Burton. He was on death row San Quentin in California, and he is now in LA County Jail for 2 or 3 years since his sentence was completely, his conviction and sentence were overturned. And he's still in there after 37 years. Really? I mean, really? It's just unbelievable.
Okay. Well, there are some,
go on and on.
We could go on, and there are wonderful questions, but I think I'll just wrap up by thanking you all, particularly Sabrina, Sunny, and Diann, Mary Kate, who's been here on the screen helping us field questions and answer things. So thank you to her. Thank you to all of you who spent time. If you want to learn more about Death Penalty Focus, deathpenaltyfocus.org. There'll be an opportunity to sign a petition that was discussed in the chat room about a petition on behalf of Melissa Lucio, who's been on death row in Texas. Death Penalty Action has put that forward, and you'll have a chance to send a petition for clemency to the governor of Texas and the Texas Board of Pardon and Paroles. We'll add the other information that we heard today. We hope you'll join us for the rest of the series, including the webinar on Monday, October 25th, How We Decrease Death Row and Abolish the Death Penalty, a conversation with the California Committee on Revision of the Penal Code. Please check out our other webinars and check out the material. And thank you again, Sabrina, Sunny, Diann, for today. Thanks for all of you. That's it for today. Onward.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.